Well, it's great to see everyone here for this really wonderful and what I know for all of you will be an inspiring occasion. I'm giving the welcoming remarks, and then Harley's going to introduce the assemblyperson who I first met when he was Senator Cedillo. You know, I have in this room, there are two sets of personal heroes of mine. The first hero is the Assemblyman, and I'll say a couple of words later. But the second set of heroes are the Dreamers. Because it's been my privilege since I came to Berkeley to get to know personally a number of our undocumented students. And I have simply found those young people to be truly inspiring. I came from a challenging background myself, but I often tell people, you know, it doesn't matter how complex your upbringing was or how difficult it was. You can always find someone else who's more courageous than you are and who's overcome more barriers than you have. And that's been exactly my experience here with the students who are here as Dreamers. I had the privilege, some of you may know this story, but I'll repeat it to you. So at the beginning of the summer, I was at an event at Carnegie Mellon University in which a few of us, it was about advanced manufacturing and robotics. And a few of us had the opportunity of meeting one-on-one with President Obama. And so we were going through the list, and then people were talking about robots and integrated circuits, et cetera, right? And I figured, okay, I get only one shot at the person. So I said, President Obama, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your support of the DREAM Act. And that I said, you know, we have a courageous assembly person in California by the name of Cedillo, and that we're pushing forward, and we have two bills, AB 130 and 131, and President, we need your support. And the President said back to me without a moment's hesitation, he said exactly the right thing. He said, absolutely. He said he's passionate in favor of the DREAM Act. And he said, you know, with all of the challenges that you face in California, you cannot afford to waste one single talented person. And that ended the conversation. He went on to the next. But that was exactly right. But these things, you know, these are really difficult issues, and I'm not going to dwell on the difficulties, but in order to make progress on these issues, we need people who are both determined and who are courageous. And I think it's 11 years, Gil, right, since Gil took up, Assemblyman Cedillo took up this cause, and year after year has been unrelenting, has not lost his faith in people or in the ability of us to make progress. And this year, we have a genuine breakthrough. And I was privileged to accompany. I was flattered that he asked me to come up to Sacramento twice, both in the Assembly and then in the Senate hearings, and to testify on behalf of, you know, Gil testified first, then I followed up, and then we had a couple of undocumented students describe their lives. And these were really inspiring sessions, and I know all of the people in Sacramento who heard this were inspired as well. So as a result, both AB 130 and 131 have passed. AB 130 was signed by the governor. That gives us a lot of flexibility, but it's critical that the governor also sign AB 131. I've seen the governor 3 times in the last month, and he says, not again, AB 131. So I've made very clear to the governor how important it is to Berkeley and how important it is as a matter of principle. Once AB 131 is signed, we are not finished, right? We must pass the DREAM Act at the federal level. This is absolutely critical. Right? I can promise every single one of you, whether I'm chancellor or some things are easier when you're not chancellor because you have some constraints on you, that I personally am going to follow in his example with him as my hero, which is I will not give up in doing whatever I can to try and support and ensure at the national level that the DREAM Act is passed. We need a congressman or Senator Cedillo at the federal level. Perhaps you would like to run for senator and can carry the ball there as well. We have some very good people here. Both of our senators right now do support the federal DREAM Act. There were some political issues in our congressional delegations, but I think they're now, I hope, straightened out. The issue is, do we solve the DREAM Act problem first, or do we try and solve the entire immigration challenges in one shot? Clearly, we need to do the DREAM Act first. right? Because that's a solvable that's a solvable problem. That's partly what you have understood, I think, quite clearly, and we'll just keep working away at these issues. So if you haven't picked up the phone and called the governor about signing AB 131, please do so as soon as you leave this hall, because we need to keep the pressure up on the governor to sign 131. It will have a huge impact for us. And so I want to congratulate the Assemblyman, but I want to congratulate all of you, too, for everything that you bring to our campus. Thank you.
I'd like to begin by thanking the Chancellor for his welcoming and for the role he has played on the DREAM Act in particular and on diversity issues more generally. He has been an important voice in the state and nationally on these issues at a particularly difficult time, and I think it is the spirit and the history and the soul of Berkeley to have that voice out there today. And it's my particular honor to introduce Assemblyperson Gil Cedillo. The Chancellor mentioned his courage and his determination. They have been so evident for such a long time and often under such difficult circumstances. I'd like to add to that his deep commitment to issues of social justice and to the values that in so many ways embody the best of what the U.S. is and aspires to be as a country. So please join me in welcoming Gil Cedillo. What we decided to do is to do this rather than ask the Assemblyman to give a talk. We've decided to do this as a conversation with myself and with you about the issues that are out there related to the DREAM Act and to issues in this universe. But I'd like to start on a more personal note by asking Professor Beatriz Mans to ask the first question.
Well, I'm an immigrant in this country, and I really admire what you're doing. And many of us here really don't know much about your own personal background, your family background, and what has made you so passionately to take these issues of working class families and immigrant families and undocumented families and children. Why have you taken these issues on, which are very difficult and politically especially very difficult? If you could just share a little bit of that with us.
Sure. Briefly, can you hear me? Yes. So I am not an immigrant. I am, I don't know, second generation, 2.5. My grandparents were immigrants, came, I guess, undocumented is the contemporary phrase, but I am not. I grew up in Boyle Heights. I grew up in a working class community, out of a working class household. I was varsity quarterback, and my father worked for American Can Company, so you're hardly going to get more American experience than that. But the fact of the matter is that this nation is a nation of immigrants. It is a unique place in the world. As a state senator, I was very fortunate. I was able to travel the world. And it's incredible that the diversity that exists in California is not typical in the rest of the world. So if you go to Sweden, everybody's Swedish. You go to India, everybody's India. It's like 1 billion people who look like me in India. It was amazing. I was like, there's 1 billion people here. They all look like me. They thought I was the guide when I got off the bus. I was the head of the delegation. At least they didn't ask me to park a car. You know, you go to Taiwan, you go to China. I mean, so there's something very unique and special about living here in California and living in this nation. And so as American, it really is our duty. I think it's the most American thing you can do is to advocate for immigrants and for the integration of immigrants into the mainstream. I started off, as I said, as a young student activist in high school protesting the war in Vietnam. You will look that up in your history books. It's the black and white photos from way back, right? Kind of there with the free speech cafeteria. So I started as a student activist, trying to figure out how to see the world. And shortly, as I was admitted to UCLA, met some incredible leaders and role models. There's a man named Bert Corona, who was an extraordinary leader in our nation for 60 years as an organizer. And I learned from him this perspective about the role, the vital role that immigrants play in our society, in our economy, in our history, but more importantly, the role that they will play in our future. And so from that point on, from the age of 20, that's been my perspective, and that's been my avocation. And that's what I've done. I did so as a labor leader. I did so as a legal advocate. Now I've done so as a legislator. So it's been a central theme. But on a personal level, I was married to an incredible woman, a lovely woman that I met a year out of high school, beautiful woman that I was in love with for my entire life once I met her. And I lost her 9 years ago, sadly, to breast cancer. And she was my supporter. She was the person who made sure that when there were decisions about doing the right thing and having other options, that you always did what was the right thing, the thing of service. And we believe in that, both of us. And so before she passed, we had this critical conversation where she was adamant that I continue my work for the undocumented community. And in particular, she was very focused on children, on the children of the undocumented. She said children are not political, that they should not be used as a political football, as we've seen, whether it's in the impounds of the vehicles and leaving people and their families on the side, or whether it's denying them an opportunity to develop themselves fully. On AB 540 students, and I agree with the Chancellor who, let me say for a minute, the Chancellor is extraordinary as a leader in this nation. You do not understand, and I know you're going to say, oh, well, he was a Chancellor, and there were only 2 people wearing a tie, and it was him and the Chancellor, so of course he's going to say that. But as a leader of a university, to be so outspoken, and there's so many restraints, but for him to be a champion of diversity, he really is a great American hero and a great leader, so he deserves our full support and our applause.
I'd like to start to build on what you've just said for a moment. In recent years, with the failure of federal legislation, we've seen a lot of activity on a state level. Much of it has been very draconian against undocumented immigrants, whether Arizona, Alabama, or many others. How do you view right now the stakes with the DREAM Act in California? What does its passage, and if it is signed, mean for California? What does it mean for reframing the national debate around these issues?
I think it's very important. And as I was saying, as the Chancellor said, AB 540 students are extraordinary when you think about values and what's involved here. AB 540 students are children who are brought here through no choice of their own. Whether they fly in from Seoul, Korea, and they overstay their visa, or whether they cross a border down in San Diego, brought here by their parents, learn a language within one generation, within their lifetime, they learn another language. They go to school under difficult circumstances. You look at the front page of the Washington Post today, the largest group of young people in poverty in this nation are Latinos. They go to school in difficult circumstances and yet excel and become part of the best and brightest of this state and of this nation. That is extraordinary. That is an asset, intellectual capital, Chancellor, that we have, that we, us, must utilize for the future of California's economy. So within the question of the national debate, there is Arizona right next to us. And so people are making different choices. When the Congress failed to pass immigration reform and the DREAM Act, they've left it to the states to choose what direction shall we take on the question of the role of immigrants in our society. Are they just something historical that people say, oh yeah, you know, I love being Italian, and they put those bumper stickers on their car, or I love being Irish, and on, you know, St. Patrick's Day everybody's Irish and they put those bumper stickers on the car? Or are they going to be fully integrated and part of the future of this nation? Unfortunately, here in California, we've chosen to look at the more progressive view and say that we want them to be part of our future. We need them to be. In the workforce in 2025, we're going to lose 1 million educated workers, engineers, architects, scientists, doctors, lawyers, etc. We need them to be replaced, because if California will maintain its position in the global economy, it's the 8th largest economy of the world, we're going to need an educated workforce. Education is our only strategy for us to stay competitive in the global economy. We cannot compete with China on the question of wages and manufacturing. We can't even compete with Mexico and Latin America. We're not going to race to the bottom and lower the standards for the American worker. And so the only opportunities we have is the investment in education. It's the only strategy. So when you see today, as I said, the Washington Post saying that Latino youth are the poorest youth in the country, the only strategy for that is the DREAM Act, is educating young men and women. In this country, public education is the great equalizer. It's what's given an opportunity for someone like me, a kid who grew up in Boyle Heights, a very modest background, to be able to get a state scholarship, to go to UCLA, and then to be standing here in this kind of hollowed halls of Berkeley, or to stand in the California State Senate and the California State Assembly and be able to have an impact on our world. That's the value of education. That's the importance. On where California stands with respect to the rest of the nation, we saw that on Tuesday, Rhode Island has also just passed their DREAM Act. They had a very courageous body of what their board is called, their head of their state educational system. And so they passed basically what's AB 540. More states, 12 now, are moving in that direction. But there's other states that choose another direction. Arizona, Mississippi, Georgia, what else? Alabama. Going backwards. History doesn't move backward, right? It doesn't go backward. It's a difficult time. And so that's why in the debates for the presidency, the lead on the Republican is a guy who has stood firm on this question of educating immigrant students. The Plyler case comes out of Texas. If I can for like a brief second, the right of immigrant students to be educated, the legal right, starts with Mendez versus the city of Westminster here in California, 1948, moves on to Brown versus Board of Ed, then goes, and Earl Warren was the governor when Mendez passed, then he was on the Supreme Court, moves on to Plyler in Texas in the mid-'80s. And Plyler, the judges said, look, we have a decision to make. Regardless of how they got here, we either choose to educate these young men and women, or in the alternative, we create a subclass of people who will be illiterate, uneducated, and prone to be a social burden on our society. We have to make a choice. We abhor subgroups of people, right, in our democracy. And so they passed Plyler. It's a Texas case. And so the Texas governors have been very good on this issue, both AB 540 and this DREAM Act. And so then it moved to California with Proposition 187, and then on to our efforts this year in the U.S. Supreme Court defending the AB 540 program of California. So the legal argument for educating immigrant students is well established in law. It is, in fact, the rule of law. And you'll hear from the right, a lot of people say, hey, what about the rule of law? Well, you know what? The rule of law has been established through case law, through the Supreme Court, that these students have a legal right to be educated, and we should educate them, Chancellor, because they are the future of our economy. California, the last thing about the role of California as a leading state, California, remember December this past year, Governor Schwarzenegger had vetoed the DREAM Act for the third time. And the federal DREAM Act had failed, the lame duck session. And so this effort to integrate immigrants and to have a victory was at its lowest point. It was a very dismal time period at the end of the year. And so many of us who do this, and the immigrant rights activists and the immigrant rights leaders said, look, we need a victory. And that victory was AB 130. We needed something that we could move rapidly through the legislative process. We had a new governor, a governor who was visionary, a governor who was fearless, a governor who wasn't worried about politics, who would take policy matters on their merits. And we moved 130 to his desk as promptly as possible. And that became the first victory. And that demonstrated that by building a broad coalition, one that's focused on the economy and the self-interest of the state and all the Californians in the state, one that was very diverse, disciplined, and effective, that we could have a victory. And that was the signing of AB 130. We look forward to the signing of AB 131. The governor has indicated that he favors it and that he continues to be supportive of the efforts of educating all students because he considers them vital to our future.
We'd like to open it up to questions that you might have.
Why is it that you think that the governor is taking his time in signing AB 131 when he said that he would support it?
I think he's very busy. We write a lot of bills. I think there's 1,000 bills. And I think he's very busy. We've got a lot of issues tied into the economy, a lot of legislation. He's different. He actually reads the bills. He asks questions. And so there's a very methodical process that he goes through that's driving his staff crazy and making us a little anxious. But he actually looks at every bill and asks a bunch of questions, and then his staff has to go get the answers from the authors and their offices. And so he personally is looking at every single bill before he vetoes it or signs it. And then he writes the veto message or the signing message. And so that's just his approach. And he has until October 9th. And so as far as we're concerned, October 9th or tomorrow, it's all good. It's all in time.
Other questions? Yes.
So this is more for the federal DREAM Act. I'm just looking for your opinion. So what alternatives does it offer for those that barely miss the requirements for the federal DREAM Act? So whether it's age or number of years in school, especially in terms of entrepreneurs, so people that go to school for a year or two, decide that they have this brilliant idea and aren't able to execute it for whatever reasons. I know a lot of countries, like I believe Chile and Mexico, have a lot of great immigrant startup programs that help boost their economy by attracting these great innovators into their countries.
Yep. The Mexican government just had a big convention in Los Angeles 3 weeks ago, in which they set up 200, 250, huge kiosks, like the size of this room, but 250 of them, looking for entrepreneurs, for small businesses. In this state, I guess it's federal legislation, tax policy, many students are looking at the limited liability corporation. And so while they may not be able to work for someone, they appear to have the ability to set up their own corporation and sell their product, their work product, whether it's legal research or it's their renderings as an architect or whatever the product that they produce, that they can sell that as a consultant and as their own company. And so some are looking at that model as a way for them to utilize their intellectual capital. Yes.
Yes.
Hello, my name's Ruben. Thank you for being here. The question that I have is more so towards, in my Ruben imagination, we passed everything, 131, all this good stuff. My concern is that in these conversations that are leading up to passing it, we're not having conversations of what happens after, the support services, the support that these students are going to necessitate when they come to these campuses. because I think even being in Berkeley, we're very privileged that we do have several support services. But when I go to conferences across the state, within the state, and I start asking me, can you point me towards the counseling service for these students? Can you point me towards the financial aid, specialized people that are going to be working with these students, so on and so forth? It's like, oh, we didn't know that existed.
Yep.
So how can we incorporate that conversation into the rhetoric that we're saying in order to pass these, so that we start laying that foundation, so that by the time that we do pass it, these students are going to be welcomed into a full specialized team of faculty, staff, and also community of students that can comprehend their struggles, their experiences, their needs, and not see that as something to judge them by, but to grow upon.
No, that's very good. I think that's some of the conversations that have to take place locally, right? That leadership will come from, you know, a particular community college, a particular CSU, a particular UC. I think that's kind of not so much the advantage, but that's what we do in the interim once the bill gets signed, the implementation, the ramping up, the preparation for it. These are all questions that now follow naturally from signing the two bills, and what to do with the interim period. The other question that gets asked is, so what happens if somebody graduates and they're educated but they still can't work? And it's a very good question. It's a question that, you know, every interview I do and all the, you know, town hall meetings and et cetera, and I say, look, it's a real simple question for us. Education is for life. So my mother used to tell me when I was on the bus, mijo, you get educated, that's for life. Nobody can take that from you. And so the question is, as we wait, we know your legal status, though, isn't for life. Your legal status at some point will change. I've had a dozen students in my office whose lives have changed. One got a political asylum because he was from El Salvador. Another was through marriage, his status changed. Another, two women who were undocumented students, their legal status changed. Your legal status changes, but so the question is when that status does change, where are you going to be in terms of preparing yourself for that moment? And so that's why we continue to push for the funding, AB 131 and 130, so that when that moment does come, or immigration reform, or the Federal DREAM Act, when that moment does come, that there is a community of students who are prepared for that.
Yes.
My name is Ramon. Thank you for being here. I have a question. Thinking about access to education, I'm very interested to hear what can be done to start opening up access in terms of funding, because the way we fund education in the state goes by districts, and that in many ways poses an institutional barrier because the funds given to schools are not equal because they're based on property value and all this. What can be done to begin to change the way we distribute the monies throughout the California state?
You know, this funding of public education, K through 12, is extraordinarily complex. There's probably about 5 people who know how it works, and 3 of them wrote the legislation, and 2 of them lobbied for it. And so I can't tell you the answer to that. What I can tell you, though, is that at every level, it's underfunded. Even though we have Prop 98, 40%, 40 cents out of every dollar goes to K through 12, including the community colleges, it's not adequate. And when we're the 8th largest economy of the world, when we hit $2 trillion of economic activity, we have some real structural problems in terms of funding, not just public education, but government. I mean, we are the 8th largest economy of the world. And as we said, education is vital to our future, right? Because we're not going to go back. We're not going to create manufacturing again. We're not going to do the heavy industries. You know, we're going to rely on technology. We're going to rely on an educated workforce. And we just need to invest more. Structurally, in California, we have high unemployment right now, pervasive. We have 7 million people without access to health insurance and to health care. And yet, we're the 8th largest economy of the world. And so our challenge is how do we change our taxation policy, right? How do we restructure the distribution of wealth in this incredible state? Half of America's billionaires live here. A quarter of America's millionaires live here. People at that level live here by choice. They can live anywhere in the world, but they choose to live in California because it's an extraordinary state. Great public education, great UC, CSU community college system, great ports, great airports, great cities, great recreation, great community, great diversity. All these things are magnets for all people, but particularly people of wealth. So the challenge for us is to figure out how we utilize the incredible wealth of California to make sure that we do the things that you're talking about, is make education the baseline, quality education the baseline for every Californian that lives in the state.
Before taking, I'll take you in 1 second. I can't resist adding a little footnote here. This is from a New York Times editorial on the DREAM Act of September 3rd of this year. The headline is California Dreaming, and the editorial strongly endorses your efforts on this and says that, quote, the California bill is expected to cost $40 million, about 1% of the $3.5 billion that California spends on state college aid, end quote.
It's a penny per dollar.
Yes.
And Brian.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ruby. The media seems to portray Latinos and undocumented individuals in a poor light, to say the least. And how can I, as inspiration, as a motivation, share my story to, help with this cause? Because my father came here undocumented, and I was able to go to UC Davis, go to Stanford Medical School, and now I'm here getting my MPH at UC Berkeley. So when I hear about, Mexicans or undocumented crossing the borders and we're, criminals and all this stuff, how can I be that example? How can I go out there and show my face and say, no, we're not all criminals. We can be successful, if not the top in the nation.
Right, that's one of the challenges that exists, because there is this very pronounced anti-immigrant hysteria that's taking place. There's a crisis in the economy. People are very stressed and very challenged. But the challenges of our economy are from a global nature, right? And so what's important is for AB 540 students to be sensitive of the responsibility that they have. Because I recognize that they're vilified. I recognize that the challenges are difficult. But they're also being scrutinized. And they have to realize that with that comes this incredible responsibility, that what you do is no longer what you do as a person, but if you do something and you happen to be AB 540, then that's reflective of the entire community of AB 540 students. It's the same thing with unlicensed motorists. Driving a vehicle is inherently dangerous activity. That's why we don't let children drive or some seniors drive. That's why you can't drink and drive. It's inherently dangerous, and you have to be responsible. We have 2.5 million unlicensed motorists, simply because they can't apply for a license. But if there's one accident, and that motorist happens to be unlicensed, it's reflective of the entire community. It's unfair, but that's the reality. And so we have to be very, very thoughtful about that. We are focused, very much so, as we talk about this issue, to try to re-image the students. And I think the students have been great examples for us, both in their testimony, the witnesses, the spokespersons. I think it's great. For example, we work with a young man named David Cole, who is a Korean immigrant. He's the band leader at UCLA. Now, when somebody thinks of undocumented students, they're not thinking of the band leader at UCLA. Yet David Cole was brought here by his mother, flew in, they overstayed their visa, he grew up, thought everything was fine until he had to go ask for that social. And then all of a sudden, his reality gets transformed to being an undocumented student. And so those are some of the things that we have to be thoughtful about. And it's a great question. I think you're doing a great example. Over here, and then over there.
Hello, my name is Elazar Chacha. I wanted to bring the conversation back to Berkeley. Just this week alone, we have 2 protests. A about budget cuts and about the diversity bake sale. And I was wondering, I think it was all fueled by misinformation. And so I was wondering, especially with the AB 130 and 131, how can us students play a role in distributing the information and making sure that misinformation doesn't occur?
Right. Right, we have to work on that, because you're absolutely right. First of all, AB 130 doesn't cost 1 cent to one person. That's amazing. Yet everybody was all up in arms. 130, 130, what are you doing, what are you doing? It's like, it doesn't cost anybody a penny. So what are you upset about? Second, 131 has already been budgeted for the last 10 years. It's in the funding formula for every student that graduates from high school. Because when they do the funding formula, they only look at the number of students, the graduates, and how many are headed towards college. They don't look at anybody's immigration status. Second, that the funding formula, part of it is done on student fees. Immigrants pay taxes. Let me tell you, if you're an immigrant, you don't go and pump gas in your car and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm an immigrant, here's my iCard, take off the gas tax. It doesn't happen. You don't go over there to Costco and say, hey, here's my Costco card and here's my immigrant card, and don't charge me that 10% sales tax. It doesn't happen. Immigrants pay taxes just like everybody else. They have a job, the person's doing the payroll, they take the payroll taxes out. It's funding Social Security. There's a reason there's a surplus in the Social Security fund is because you have 1 million ITIN numbers in the state, people who are working and paying taxes. But those are myths that are perpetuated constantly. Part of this anti-immigrant hysteria is that it's so pervasive. Hardly when we travel, it's when you get away from it. And then you come back and you think there's a war going on here. Just the way we perceive violence in Mexico, and we're like, oh my God, we don't want to go there. The same when you leave here and then you come back, you say, oh, this is an invasion, what's going on here, right? Because you've got Fox Television 24/7, right? You've got these shock jocks on radio 24/7. I mean, it's amazing. We get used to it, we get numb, it becomes background noise. But when you leave and then you come back, and you see that there's this hysteria that takes place. And so it's a real challenge. And the challenge for us is to have the education to inform people, right? You say $40 million, everybody, oh, 40 million, 40 million, 40 million. So it's 3.5 billion. It's like, well, what's the relationship between those two, right? Well, it's a penny, right? It's 1 penny to $1. And it's 1 penny that's been paid for, right? So it's 1 penny that's been paid for to $1 in terms of the funding, but people are like, oh, 40 million. Oh, not one student will lose a scholarship because of this program. Not one student will be displaced, right? Because it's already funded. So it's simply opening up the pool for something that's already been paid. But again, it's a real challenge, trust me. We've been working on these issues the entirety of my legislative career. Much of my career in labor, even though I represented a public sector union, much of my career in labor on this issue and on messaging, it's very challenging. And you have to be very thoughtful about this. We have worked, when we work with students and preparing for, talking to the press, it's very important to stay focused on message because people will take one word, one comment, and exploit it and flip it around and say something else. This stuff with the bake sale, I mean, it's just absurd. It's just ridiculous, So, over here. Yes. The guy, the only other person in the tie. It's like he must have worked in an office or something.
Hey, boss. How are you?
Hey. My ringer.
I just, first off, want to begin.
Did you have a great summer or what?
Yeah, actually. I just wanted to begin by saying thank you. And also, you touched upon the deadline, which is October 9th. And I think one of the things that is really difficult is feeling like you have agency, like you can really make a difference, I think, especially as individuals and us as students, in trying to pass this legislation. Yes. So that being said, what would you recommend? How can we organize and utilize ourselves better to make sure that AB 131 gets signed?
I would say be focused. The decision maker in this instance is the governor. The chancellor's been great, but you've got to move all resources, right, towards the person making the decision, and that's the governor. Now, the governor is inclined. He's indicated publicly. He never says on any bill that he's going to sign something, but all the factors are positive. So I would focus on him with a very positive message. And if you write a letter to the Capitol, it has to be directed to the governor. And amazingly, he looks at mail. And, you know, it's amazing. And your emails and your phone calls should be asking to speak to the governor and what your position is. And you should be very positive and encouraging about him. I mean, he made history on 130, and you can ask him to continue to make history and to continue to put California at the front of the nation on this issue.
Yes.
My name's Naomi. My question is, my concern actually is overall Latinos and undocumented students are already underrepresented in education, in higher education. It's October 10th, Jerry Brown signed AB 131. What are the next steps to pass the National DREAM Act without making a de facto military draft for our communities?
Mm-hmm. I think passing the California DREAM Act is a very huge and important step in terms of directing the nation. I just think it is. I mean, we cannot have 12, 15 states going in one direction, and another 12, 15 states going in another, and then, you know, the balance somewhere in the middle. Because it is one nation, we need, it will force people to come to the point that we need one national policy. That policy, hopefully, at the most progressive end, will be the policy that California has, which means fully embracing undocumented students. We saw that within this year, as dismal as it was in December, that within this year, in terms of the quality of life for immigrants and documented students in this state, 130, as we wait for 131, the president says he's not going to prioritize deporting undocumented students. We have legislation on the governor's desk to stop these so-called DUI checkpoints, which are set up in low-income immigrant communities and are designed to take vehicles from immigrant motorists. And so we have legislation on his desk to stop that. And then hopefully we come back in the fall or in January with an effort to provide a driver's license. And so the quality of life, if you go back to December and look at this change, Chancellor, incredible change in terms of the quality of life for undocumented students. It's not perfect. It's far from perfect. But with respect to what a state is doing to set a model and a template for a national debate, a debate that's taking place, you know, you see the candidate who will run for the presidency of the nation, Republican candidate, there's one who's getting clobbered, right? The Republicans are having a war amongst themselves on this question. And so hopefully we have on the other end of the spectrum a template, a model that's set by California, and one that then sets the basis for the negotiations for a national policy.
In back.
Hi, my name is Jaime. I'm in high school. I'm a sophomore, but I want to ask if the DREAM Act does pass, what grade will benefit the most of it? Like these seniors that's going to graduate, my sophomore year that's going to graduate, what grade is going to benefit the most?
Jaime, first of all, let me congratulate you for being here. Very courageous. You know, I didn't speak publicly till I was 30, you know, so it's, you know, my wife would say, you're very quiet, huh? It's like, yeah. So, you know, I applaud you for being here. You know, I will tell you, I hope that today, that parents whose children are undocumented are talking to their children in kindergarten. And because this is how much I believe in this act and what we're about to do, Chancellor. It's like, this says that in California, in the field of education, we are all equal. And that if you work hard, study, play by the rules, that you have an opportunity to go to a great university, right? The University of California, whether it's here at Berkeley or in Los Angeles, San Diego, Merced, Santa Cruz, Riverside. Did I miss anybody? Irvine, San Diego. It's the worst thing you could do is start naming specifics. Merced, I know, Merced was there.
But he did it twice, too. We have to
that you have this opportunity to go to a place like the University of California and get a scholarship, get a Cal Grant, get one of these institutional foundation scholarships, and that you can then transform my life experience, transform first your life, right? I'm the first in my family, right, to go to college. My parents didn't graduate from high school. My father worked in a factory, American Can Company. My mother worked in a sewing factory. I used to go to work with her on a bus. And yet, through one scholarship, one opportunity to go to the University of California can transform your life, then the life of your family, and then an impact on your community. And that's transformative. It is really, really transformative. And so our hope, our work after we finish this, will be in talking to parents about preparing their children, right? Having this discussion that this young man talked about earlier. Gathering the resources, beginning to create and build the infrastructure of services for people who are in kindergarten, right? So that the children of undocumented can engage in the type of self-help and preparation that will be necessary. So it's not strictly relying on the state, but that there's also a preparation by the family of getting prepared for when their children go to the university.
Yes.
I heard that ominous bell.
Hi, my name is Vanessa. My question for you is, how have you been able to successfully garner the support of both your fellow Assembly and Senate members, both Republican and Democrat, versus other Assembly or Senate members that have been able to do so for their own bills, especially on such a controversial issue?
You know, I've been working on this a long time, advocating for immigrants since I was 20. I did so both my legal career, I did so both as a union leader, and I've learned a lot. It's very challenging. One of the things I've learned is that you have to, one, have a conversation, and two, figure out what the other person's interests are. Now, I'm the third most senior legislator in the state legislature today because of term limits. And so I have a lot more experience than almost everybody there. And so I work, I mean, you know, there's a certain irony here, but my seatmate is a Minuteman. He's the founder of the Minutemen in California. And yet we're able to have a civil discussion. I respect everyone's opinion. I don't agree with many of them. I clearly don't agree with my seatmate. But we have an agreement not to yell, not to raise our voice, to listen to each other. And I think when you do that, and then when you use, as I have for the last 15 years, my resources, my experience to help other members be successful, that then it puts me in a position to go to them and say during a debate, you know, it's a really tense time period. Maybe we don't need rancor today. And to have a debate on 131 that was only one mic, I think, went up. And it was out of showing respect for the other side and then respect on our side that we didn't need to have all the acrimony, right? And so some of that, a lot of that has come just from my own personal maturity and a lot of experience that I've had in advocating for these difficult issues. Because at least in the legislative arena, which I now have the privilege of being in, I know that it's important for all these legislators to feel that they're heard, that they're respected. And in many instances, we have some extraordinary allies. So for example, the ag industry is very supportive of our efforts. But they're supportive of our efforts, I believe, in response to a long relationship, 15 years working with them on issues that are important to their industry, on water policy, and helping them be successful on water policy, and helping them be successful in understanding the changing demographics of the Central Valley. And so because we've been allies and supportive of initiatives of that industry, of helping them try to expand markets, we've done something, a resolution to help the ag industry sell its products to Cuba, for example, and to open up those markets as a place to sell fresh fruits and vegetables on another market, strictly as just an ability for them to move their product to another market. Those relationships over the time period have given us the opportunity then to talk about difficult, controversial issues like the driver's license, like the DUI checkpoints, like the DREAM Act. And I think that's why we've been successful.
We have time for one more question, unfortunately. Right here.
Hi, my name is Nadia. And the undocumented students have been a marginalized sector within the community of students of color. And these days, within institutions of higher education, the numbers of students of color are dwindling. I mean, right now, we're looking at 8% for Latinos in the UC and even lower for Black students. Once AB 131 is passed, what do you think we can do to hold colleges and universities accountable to allow these students who will finally have some funding for their education the opportunity to attend an institution of higher learning?
As I said, my hope in large part is that the bill and our work with the communities will create the pool of applicants that are able to come to the university. I really do believe that. Some of our preparation right now, our planning for when I leave the legislature, is to work specifically on that, is to figure out how to help communities prepare to come to the university. I think students' role in terms of that is always to be an advocate for a more broader, more democratic, and more open public university system. And to the extent as this public university system becomes less and less public, it's very important for students to play a role in trying to keep it public and to keep the doors open and to make sure that it's democratic and make sure that it's reflective of the demographics of the state. That's valuable because of the incredible talent that I've seen, particularly amongst immigrant students. They have more initiative, they're more tenacious, first at the library, last to leave, very entrepreneurial, very creative, very resilient. Those are extraordinary talents that our state and our economy needs for the future, and so it's important to be supportive of that talent.
One brief final comment before we conclude. I just want to thank Gil Cedillo for being with us. And to say, we all know the importance of the DREAM Act for California, but to an unusual degree, your work on this has begun to shift a national debate that goes much beyond the DREAM Act. That's a remarkable achievement. We talked earlier about the determination, the perseverance that you've had on this. That always looks better looking back on it than all those times you were alone and worked towards this. I want to thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you.